In May 1775, a brewer named Arthur Guinness stood in a trench outside his Dublin brewery and picked up a pickaxe. The Dublin city government had sent a committee, a sheriff, and a group of armed laborers to cut off his water supply. They claimed he had no legal right to draw from the city watercourse. They had tools. They had authority. They had the law on their side. Arthur Guinness grabbed the pickaxe from one of the laborers, planted himself over the trench, and told them, with what the official record politely describes as very much improper language, that he would lay flat any man who touched his water pipes. The sheriff retreated. The committee left. The dispute dragged on for 9 more years, until Guinness won a water lease lasting 8,795 years for £10 a year. If that number sounds absurd, consider the lease he had already signed. 16 years earlier, on December 31st, 1759, a 34-year-old Arthur Guinness walked into a dilapidated, abandoned 4-acre brewery at St. James's Gate in Dublin. He looked at the crumbling copper, the rotting mash tun, and the empty malt houses, and he signed a lease for 9,000 years at £45 per annum. 9,000 years. The company eventually bought the property outright as the brewery expanded, but the original parchment still exists. It is displayed under glass in the floor of the Guinness storehouse in Dublin, a reminder that the man who signed it was betting on a future nobody else could see. That is either the act of a lunatic or the act of a man who could see something nobody else could. If you are the kind of person who wants to know the real stories behind what is in your glass, you are in the right place. Hit subscribe and turn on the bell. This channel uncovers the hidden history behind every drink you have ever ordered. And this one starts with a pickaxe and a bet that has not expired yet. This is the history of Guinness. Before we start, 3 things I am not explaining yet. First, a man missed a shot at a bird in 1951. That single missed shot led to the best-selling copyrighted reference book ever published. The book has nothing to do with beer, but it would not exist without Guinness. Second, Guinness is not black. It has never been black. If you hold a pint up to the light, you will see something most people have never noticed. Third, a Guinness employee invented one of the most important statistical tools in modern science. The company forbade him from publishing under his own name. He used a pseudonym, and scientists still call it by that fake name today. 3 answers, all coming. But first, we need to talk about an archbishop. Arthur Guinness was born in 1725 in Selbridge, County Kildare. His father, Richard, was a land steward and brewer for a man named Arthur Price, the Church of Ireland, Archbishop of Cashel. The Archbishop became young Arthur's godfather and namesake. When Archbishop Price died in July 1752, he left Arthur £100. In mid-18th century Ireland, £100 was roughly 3 to 4 years of wages for a skilled craftsman. It was enough to change a life. Arthur used the money to lease a small brewery in Leixlip in 1755. He brewed ale there for 4 years, learning the trade. Then he made a decision that changed everything. He left the small-town brewery to his brother Richard, rode to Dublin, and signed the most optimistic contract in the history of alcohol. He married Olivia Whitmore in 1761. She brought a £1,000 dowry and powerful connections. Together they had 21 children. 10 survived to adulthood. Arthur sat on the board of the Meath Hospital, founded Dublin's first Sunday school in 1786, and spent the next 44 years turning a derelict brewery into the foundation of a dynasty. He died on January 23, 1803. He never saw what his brewery would become. In the 1750s, Dublin had between 40 and 70 small breweries, all producing the same thing: Dublin Ale. It was sweet, amber, lightly hopped, and it spoiled fast. The problem was that dark, aged beer from London was flooding the Irish market. English brewers had better technology, bigger capital, and tax rebates on exports. Dublin Ale was losing. The London beer was called porter. Named after the street and river porters who drank it, porter was brewed from heavily roasted malt, hopped aggressively, and aged in massive wooden vats for 6 to 18 months. It lasted. It traveled. And the working class loved it. Arthur Guinness began brewing porter around 1778, competing directly with imports from London's industrial mega-brewers. Then the Irish Parliament gave him an opening. In 1795, they removed domestic excise duty on Irish-brewed beer, while raising duties on whiskey and imported spirits. Irish porter suddenly had a price advantage. On April 22, 1799, Arthur Guinness brewed his very last batch of Dublin Ale. He shut down ale production entirely and committed 100% of St. James's Gate to porter and stout. It was a bet-the-company gamble. Porter lasted months without turning sour. It could be aged in bulk. It could cross oceans. And it meant Guinness could push London imports out of the Irish market and invade the British one. Arthur Guinness, too, took over after his father's death and drove the expansion. By 1833, Guinness was the largest brewery in Ireland. By 1886, it was the largest brewery in the world, producing 1.2 million barrels a year. By the late 19th century, St. James's Gate had grown from 4 acres to 64. It was no longer a brewery. It was a city inside a city. Chief Engineer Samuel Geoghegan designed an internal narrow-gauge railway system spanning 8 miles of track inside the plant to move barrels between the upper and lower levels of the site, separated by a 50-foot cliff. Geoghegan built a subterranean spiral tunnel, 2.5 turns, 61-foot radius, bored directly under the streets of Dublin. Custom-built locomotives hauled casks through the corkscrew and onto the national rail network. The brewery had its own electrical power station, its own fire brigade, its own fleet of steam barges on the River Liffey carrying casks to the port, where purpose-built Guinness steamships transported stout to Britain. In 1899, the brewery hired a young Oxford-trained mathematician and chemist named William Seeley Gossett. His job was quality control. How do you measure the consistency of barley yields and yeast fermentation when your sample sizes are small? Gossett solved the problem by inventing what became one of the most important statistical tools in science: a way to draw reliable conclusions from small data sets. He published his work in 1908, but Guinness had a strict policy forbidding employees from publishing research under their real names. So Gossett used a pseudonym. He called himself Student. The method is still called Student's T-test. Countless scientists running clinical trials, testing hypotheses, and analyzing experimental data have relied on a tool invented inside a brewery by a man who could not publish under his own name. In October 1886, Edward Cecil Guinness took the company public on the London Stock Exchange, valued at £6 million. The IPO was oversubscribed by more than 20 times. The public applied for over £127 million in shares for just $5.2 million worth of allotment. Crowds mobbed the headquarters of Baring Brothers on Bishopsgate. Police were called. Bank doors were physically smashed in by frantic applicants. Shares surged 60% in 2 weeks. The Guinness family ran their brewery like a private welfare state. Workers received wages 10 to 20% above the Dublin average. They got free medical and dental care for themselves and their families decades before any government healthcare system existed. In 1894, the company appointed Dr. John Lumsden as Chief Medical Officer. Lumsden personally surveyed nearly 1,800 workers' homes across Dublin. documenting sanitation, nutrition, and disease. He expanded company health care to cover wives and children, established tuberculosis sanatoria, and founded the St. John Ambulance Brigade of Ireland. In 1904, Guinness employees got funeral grants, marriage grants, education scholarships for their children, subsidized meals in brewery dining halls, and a non-contributory pension after 15 years of service. Jobs were hereditary. Sons of employees had priority hiring. Getting fired was almost unheard of. And then there were the 2 free pints of stout every day for every worker, a tradition dating back to 1759 that lasted in various forms until the 1990s, when Dublin's working class was locked out of their jobs during the brutal 1913 lockout led by William Martin Murphy. Guinness employees did not strike. Why would they? They had the best jobs in Ireland, and they knew it. Edward Cecil Guinness, the first Earl of Iva, spent over £250,000 building social housing for Dublin's poor, public swimming baths, covered markets, and a 500-bed hostel for homeless men. His brother-in-law opened St. Stephen's Green to the public in 1880. Benjamin Lee Guinness spent £150,000 of his own money restoring St. Patrick's Cathedral from near-total collapse between 1860 and 1865. He managed the entire restoration himself without hiring an architect. The Guinness family built Dublin as much as they brewed its beer. But there was a tension at the heart of the company that never fully went away. Arthur Guinness was a Protestant. His workforce was overwhelmingly Catholic. The Guinness family were Unionists who opposed Irish independence. Senior management was exclusively Protestant and university-educated. The laborers, coopers, and draymen were working-class Catholic Dubliners. This religious divide did not dissolve until the mid-20th century. During the Great Famine of 1845 to 1852, Guinness continued operating at full capacity. Production did not shrink. It grew. Small regional breweries collapsed. Guinness absorbed their market share. Here is the moral paradox that historians still argue about. Grain was being brewed into porter and shipped to England for profit, while Irish peasants starved under British trade policies. Between 1845 and 1855, roughly 2 million Irish people emigrated, and Guinness traveled with them. In Irish pubs in Liverpool, Boston, New York, and Melbourne, a pint of stout became a sensory link to the homeland, a taste of everything they had left behind. Irish nationalists were not always grateful. During the War of Independence, radicals boycotted the beer, hijacked delivery wagons and labeled it traitor juice and Protestant porter. Guinness management remained institutionally loyal to the Crown, while much of its workforce came from working-class Catholic Dublin. The beer sat in the middle. On Easter Monday 1916, the Irish Republican Brotherhood launched the Easter Rising in Dublin. St. James's Gate sat directly between 2 major rebel positions, and the British Army had a problem. They needed to move troops through sniper-lined streets. The solution was sitting in the Guinness yard. British soldiers requisitioned Guinness's Daimler flatbed trucks, drove them to the railway works in Inchicore, and welded locomotive boiler plates and smokebox steel onto the truck beds with gun slits cut through the metal. They called them boilers. They were among the earliest improvised armored vehicles used in urban combat. Inside the brewery itself, a British sergeant named Robert Flood commanded a nervous military guard. Believing rebels were infiltrating the grounds, Flood's men shot and killed 2 unarmed Guinness night clerks, William John Rice and Cecil Dockeray. Both men were completely innocent. Flood was court-martialed for murder but acquitted due to war conditions. After the Rising, Guinness management fired any worker suspected of sympathizing with the rebels for disloyalty to His Majesty. The same company that gave workers free health care, pensions, and 2 pints a day also demanded absolute political loyalty. Benevolence had a price. The Guinness dynasty accumulated enormous wealth. It also accumulated tragedy. In November 1944, Lord Moyne, a Guinness great-grandson serving as British minister in Cairo, was assassinated by members of a militant Zionist underground group. In December 1966, 21-year-old Tara Brown, heir to the Guinness fortune, crashed his Lotus Elan into a parked truck in South Kensington, London, and was killed instantly. His friend John Lennon read the newspaper report and wrote the opening lines of one of the greatest songs ever recorded. He blew his mind out in a car. He didn't notice that the lights had changed. A day in the life. Lady Henrietta Guinness died by suicide in 1978, jumping from a medieval bridge in Italy. Peter Guinness was killed in a car crash that same year. Olivia Channon, granddaughter of a Guinness heiress, died of a drug overdose at Oxford in 1986. The tabloids called it the Guinness Curse. The family called it the price of too much money and too little peace. For 170 years, Guinness refused to advertise. They did not need to. Everybody already drank it. Then sales started slipping after World War I. In 1928, the brewery hired London agency S.H. Benson. A team of researchers walked into pubs across Britain and asked a simple question: why do you drink Guinness? The most common answer: I feel good after it. In February 1929, Guinness launched the slogan that would define a century of advertising: Guinness is good for you. Artist John Gilroy painted the iconic images: the toucan, the sea lion, the ostrich, the bewildered zookeeper. Mystery novelist Dorothy L. Sayers, working as a copywriter at Benson, wrote the toucan verse: if he can say as you can, Guinness is good for you. How grand to be a toucan. Just think what toucan do. Some doctors and hospitals took the slogan literally. From the 1930s through the 1970s, physicians across Britain and Ireland prescribed Guinness to pregnant women to enrich breast milk, to surgical patients to restore stamina, and to blood donors who received a free pint immediately after donating. The reality: a pint of Guinness contains about 0.3 milligrams of iron. You would need to drink 30 to 50 pints a day to meet basic nutritional requirements. Regulators shut down the health claims in the 1970s. In 1999, director Jonathan Glazer created the Surfer commercial for Guinness. Polynesian surfers tackling giant waves that transform into charging white horses. Soundtrack by Left Field. A Channel 4 poll voted it the greatest television commercial of all time. In November 1951, the managing director of Guinness, Sir Hugh Beaver, went bird shooting at a weekend party near Wexford, Ireland. He took aim at a flock of golden plovers and missed. That evening by the fire, Beaver and his friends fell into a heated argument. What is the fastest game bird in Europe? The golden plover or the red grouse? They searched every reference book in the house. None had the answer. Beaver realized that this exact type of argument was happening every single night in an estimated 81,400 pubs across Britain and Ireland, and there was no book to settle them. In 1954, he hired twin brothers Norris and Ross McWhirter, who ran a small fact-finding agency in London, to compile a reference book of superlatives and extremes. They spent 13.5 weeks working 90-hour shifts. The first edition of the Guinness Book of Records was published on August 27, 1955. It was meant as a free promotional giveaway for pubs. By Christmas, it was #1 on the British bestseller list. It has since sold more than 150 million copies in dozens of languages, becoming one of the most successful copyrighted reference books ever published. All because a brewery executive missed a bird. Here is something almost nobody knows about Guinness. It is not black. Hold a pint up to direct light and look through it. What you will see is not black. It is a deep, translucent ruby red. The color comes from melanoidins, produced when unmalted barley is roasted at precisely 232 degrees Celsius. Any cooler, and you do not get the signature roasted coffee bitterness. Any hotter, and the grain catches fire. And Guinness has fewer calories than you think. A 12-ounce serving contains about 125 calories. That is less than Budweiser at 145, less than Heineken at 148, less than Stella Artois at 154, and less than a glass of orange juice at 160. The thing that makes a Guinness look and feel different from every other beer is not the color, it is the gas. In 1959, a Cambridge-trained mathematician named Michael Ash solved a problem that had plagued the brewery for years: how to serve draft Guinness consistently without blending two separate casks by hand pump. His answer was a mix of 70% nitrogen and 30% carbon dioxide, forced through a 5-hole restrictor plate. Nitrogen produces bubbles 50 times smaller than carbon dioxide. That is what gives Guinness its creamy, velvety head and smooth texture. In 1989, engineers Alan Forage and William Byrne figured out how to put it in a can. They designed a small plastic capsule, pressurized with liquid nitrogen, that fires a jet of gas into the beer the moment you crack the tab. They called it the widget. In a 2003 national poll, British consumers voted the Guinness widget the greatest British invention of the past 40 years. It beat the internet. It beat email. A plastic capsule in a beer can, rated as a greater achievement than the World Wide Web. The ritual of pouring a draft Guinness takes 119.5 seconds. Filled to 3/4. Wait for the cascade to settle, then top off. The cascade itself, those bubbles that appear to sink downward along the glass walls, is not an optical illusion. Stanford University proved in 2004 that the bubbles physically travel downward. Rising nitrogen pulls liquid upward through the center. The denser liquid hits the glass walls and falls back down, dragging the tiny bubbles with it. The bubbles are so small that the falling liquid is stronger than their buoyancy. Good things come to those who wait. Today, over 10 million pints of Guinness are consumed every day across 150 countries. On St. Patrick's Day, that number surges to 13 million. In Nigeria, the second-largest Guinness market in the world, Foreign Extra Stout is not just beer. It is a symbol of status and vitality. And here is one final detail. In 1862, Guinness adopted the Brian Boru harp as its logo and registered it as a trademark in 1876. When the Irish Free State was established in 1922, the new government wanted the same harp as the national coat of arms. But Guinness already owned the legal trademark. The Irish government had to flip the harp. On every Irish passport, every Irish coin, and every official government seal, the harp faces the opposite direction from the one on a pint of Guinness. A beer company owns the symbol of a nation, and the nation had to compromise. Arthur Guinness signed a 9,000-year lease because he believed the future was worth betting on. 265 years later, the bet has not expired. The Pickaxe is in a museum. The stout is in your glass. If the hidden stories behind what is in your glass are what brought you here, you already know what to do. Hit subscribe, turn on the bell. I will see you in the next one. The drink we are covering next was accused of causing madness, blindness, and murder. Entire countries banned it for 100 years. Scientists eventually proved every accusation was a lie. By the time the truth came out, the damage was already done. They called it the Green Fairy until the next glass